I think it's time that the generous tax subsidies that private schools get need to be ended. It is an anomaly of history that has benefited very few people. So if you're not aware, private school fees don't have VAT on them, which is at 20%. They get charitable status as schools. And if you donate to a private school, you can gift aid it. So, for example, Rishi Sunak gave £100,000 to a private school, his old school of Winchester, and then the taxpayer can add £25,000 to that. And it's estimated that those benefits cost us about £3 billion a year in subsidies or money that the Exchequer would otherwise take. Now, I think in a time when our schools are crumbling and they can't even fix the roofs for regular kids in state schools, the idea that £3 billion is going to the richest families is absurd. And some people will say, but they scrimp and save in some cases to afford private school fees. Well, the average private school costs £15,200 a year. Now, that's almost as much as a full-time salary on the minimum wage. That's not something that many people have spare. Only 6.5% of people in this country go to private schools. So I say, why should we be giving handouts to these hooray Henrys when regular people can't make ends meet? Now, some will say, 20% on those costs of private schools, that'll be really difficult for them. How will they afford it? Well, in real terms, private school fees have gone up 20% since 2010. And strangely, when that money was swilling from one lot of rich people to another lot of rich people, nobody was bothered then. So I think it's time that we end this ridiculous elitist handout from the poor to the rich. Now, Emily, what do you think about VAT on private school fees?
I just think it's just hopeless from Labour, and it just shows what their priorities are. It's all about, it was the policy that got the biggest whoop in the room at their Labour Party conference in Liverpool. And why is that? Because it goes into the sort of class war, it mobilises the politics of envy. It's not going to raise a lot of money. I also don't think VAT-free on private school fees is the equivalent of a handout. It's just not adding a tax onto something.
But when you can gift aid a donation to a private school,
I also think that what you're going to be left with is people who are scrimping and saving to send their kids. They won't go, but then you will have the hooray Henrys still going, and also you'll have people coming from abroad and going to these schools because they'll be the only ones that can afford them. It's just a stupid policy. It's a stupid policy. It's not going to raise any money, and it's actually.
You pay people scrimping and scraping. Look, most people don't have one kid; they probably have two kids. So that's like 30 grand to send two kids every year.
You do realise that some people literally get the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the aunt, all to put money into getting them into these schools.
When there are so many people in this country who can't even afford to feed their kids, when state schools are falling down, I think we should be giving money to those people that have the most.
Unfortunately, there are people who are really struggling in this country.
I don't think you do think that's unfortunate.
Well, I certainly do. And
well, you don't care because you think we should be subsidising posh people like you.
Can I just add as well, the wealthiest people who are putting their children to private school, with hard-earned money, they didn't just pop it out of their backside, a lot of them. And secondly, they are living under the highest tax burden since World War II as it is. And then you want to slap on VAT to something they worked to put their children through, probably halfway through term, some of them, who go, right, now I've got to add that onto my tax as well.
Oh, no, some millionaires don't have an extra 20 million.
Millionaires, though, is it?
I can actually just make a point, because you put forward a perfectly decent argument, and I think Labour does as well, in terms of having a taxation policy which is fair and cohesive. Yeah, it makes sense to add VAT to private schools. But one of the things that you're forgetting is that parents who send their children to private schools are paying tax, and that tax goes to the state school system, and they're not putting their children through that system.
Yeah. No, I don't
actually,
accept that.
If I can finish my point, because I've not actually made it yet. So my point is that these parents who are taking their children out of the state sector and into the private sector are actually freeing up more resources in the state sector for those people most.
They should get a tax break.
Let me answer that, because first of all, when you pay taxes, you don't pay it for a specific service like you do if you go and buy a coffee in a chain shop, right? So I don't have kids, but I still pay the same tax as someone who does. I don't get a tax rebate because I don't have kids. That's not how tax policy works. And the estimates are that if the number of kids going to private school halved, it would cost the state about £300 million a year. Well, that's 10% of the £3 billion we'd get back. So regular people, the 94% of people in this country, would be better off.
How have you worked that out, Benjamin? Because there are 700,000 kids in private schools, and they reckon that it will cost somewhere between 3.5 billion at the primary rate, at the current rate, and 4.5 billion at the secondary rate annually to bring these people into the state sector. So once again, I'm afraid to say, unlike the people who scrimp and save to send their kids to private schools, you're talking out your backside.
Very good, Darren. The songs don't add up, do they, Benjamin? You're taking with one hand and giving with another.
Out your bottom,
I think the audacity of you, a man who pretends...
I didn't go to a bloody private school,
a man who pretends to be the voice of the working class and endlessly goes on about the Red Wall and the working class and the Brexit revolution, when actually, when it comes to it, you sit there and you defend handouts and exemptions for the richest in this country. You defend people like Boris Johnson who take the mick of working people in this country. You don't give a damn about working people in this country. You just want to climb the slippery ladder yourself.
Well, I tell you what, look, I mean...
Why shouldn't he want to climb the ladder?
Well, quite, but on that point, though, I actually think these people are heroes, people that are able to pay for private healthcare, take the burden off the NHS. People who are able to pay for private schools, take the burden off the state sector. So it means that kids like me get more opportunities.
Well, Benjamin's also pro-immigration, I'm sure.
I am.
And what do you want to do? Take more of the competitive value out of the country so people just go, I don't want to come here. The only people coming here are people who want free handouts.
All I'm saying is that
private schools attract
rich people to come to the country, don't they?
All I'm saying is that private schools should operate on a fair a level playing field. But let me say this, let's be honest about why people send their kids to private schools, right? You know, it's not because they want to relieve the taxpayer of a bit of money. It's for two reasons. They want to get ahead and they want to work the system so they get an unfair advantage. That's one of the main reasons.
Is that not the same as parents that put their children through tutoring?
Well, it's a more extreme version
which they would do.
They want to do that
because
they know that in a country like ours there is an elite where other posh people give other posh people jobs, often not on merit at all. And the other reason is that they don't want their little precious Henry and Henrietta to be near those common kids.
If you had children, I bet you'd do everything you could to get them into the best school possible.
If I had children, something's gone terribly wrong.
Fortunately, folks, Butterworth will never reproduce, and we can all be grateful for that.